I guess I'm live. Hi everyone, this is Abhishek, the co-founder of Strategy4GMAT and an ISB alumnus. Today, Manan, who's my co-founder, could not join us due to unavoidable circumstances, so apologies for that. I'll wait for a few more people to join in, and once we have a sizable viewership here, we'll get going with the session. So I see a lot of people joining in already. Let's begin with the session then. I'll just lay out the agenda and then we can get going. So we'll start with the session talking about how to differentiate yourself in the ISB application. That's the number one question I would say that we've been receiving in the last few days. So we thought we'll address this through the forum. Once I discuss all of those questions and queries around differentiation and what should be the best way of differentiating yourself, I'll take the questions that we've received over the form and through email. And meanwhile, what you can also do is put your questions in the live chat window, and I'll take those during the session as well. So that's going to be the agenda. I'll quickly begin with how to differentiate yourself in the ISB application. So I think a lot of you would understand that by now there's very little that you can do to add to your profile. So you already have the GPA or the GMAT score or the undergrad name that you have on your CV. Your scores are fixed, your extracurriculars, your experience, everything is really in place, or it's at a level that you cannot really change at this point. And B schools are also very smart. So if you take a new initiative at this stage and have only say 3 to 6 months of experience in that, whether it's volunteering or joining a new club or whatever the case is, they understand that the primary motive behind that was your B school application. And that is why they do not really consider that to be a really a very weighted component of your profile. So the way you can differentiate yourself in your B school application is to have a very structured essay or a very structured story that you demonstrate through both or multiple essays that the school asks you to write. So the way you go about your essays is the number one thing, because any evaluator, once he looks at your profile and he's reading your essays, would want to know more, and that should be your goal. If an evaluator does not have interest in your profile or your essays are not structured, they would not really want to read on more about you. So that's the number one thing. Your essays need to be very, very structured, seamlessly flowing from one paragraph to the other, speaking about how you began, whether it was a particular experience or your overall profile, and what are the different facets of that. So the number one point that I would want to make here is the structure of your essay. Ensure that it is not a collection of random thoughts put together, but it's a very cohesive story that flows one paragraph from one paragraph to the other, and you're able to demonstrate effectively who you are and what you bring to the table. The second thing would be about talking more about impact or achievements rather than just talking about participation. I think a common problem that we've seen over the years and even in this cycle is that people talk about, okay, I did this, I did that, I am a team leader, or I work with a bank, or I do this, or I was working on a project, I went on site or onshore, or whatever the case is. But understand that the essays are not just a elaborated version of your resume. The essays are a place where you get anywhere between 300 to 500 words to describe what you have done and what you have achieved. So for instance, an example here would be talking about the achievement. For instance, I saved X million dollars for my firm because I implemented this project or that project, and that led to so many dollars of cost savings, etc. Or in a sales role, I brought in X million dollars of revenues or X $100,000 of revenues, etc. Because that is how you are able to quantify the impact, and that is an achievement. Just being in a sales role or being in a being a part of a cost saving program does not really tell the admissions committee or the evaluator anything. But once you talk about what you achieved, is when the impact is clearly coming out, and then they are able to understand what's the kind of experience that you have had, and that is what the number one point would be there. So that's about bringing out the impact. The other thing that I'd like to talk about is bringing in various facets of your personality. I think a lot of people just talk about work or professional experience or academics, but they do not really talk about other aspects of their profile or other aspects of who they are, or even personal experiences. So I think that's really important, and especially a top school like ISB or any other global B school would want to know you as a person and not just you as a professional. Okay, and because of that, it's very important that you bring out who you are. So you talk about your initiatives, whether it is volunteering or you talk about music, dance, or other interests, and put together a very nice cohesive story which not just talks about your professional experience and background, but also your personal experiences and how that will contribute to the class at ISB or any other B school that you are applying to. So I think those would be the key themes or key differentiators in your application. Please ensure that you go about mentioning these things and being very, very impactful. You quantify the impact, and you are not only talking about mere participation, but also talking about the achievements. And don't restrict yourself only to professional experiences or academic experiences, but talk about your personal experiences as well, if you believe that they are worthy enough to be talked about, and put together all of this in a very cohesive manner. As I mentioned before, it should be a very seamless, a very easygoing read for anybody, because they're not going to give you say 10, 15, 20 minutes for each of your essays. It's going to be a very quick read because there are thousands of applications, and that is how you need to differentiate yourself if you want to get to the next stage of the B school that you want to apply to. So I think that's more or less about what I wanted to mention or discuss on differentiating yourself. What I'll do is I'll start with the questions that we have received over email and through the form. And also, meanwhile, any questions that you guys might have, please put them on the chat window, and we'll take them one by one. Sure. All right. I'll take the first question that I see on the chat window, and then also take a few from the email, and then come back to the chat window. So keep writing in. Abdul asks, is there an advantage if we submit the application well in advance of the round one deadline? I heard last year that people who submitted early received the interview call as early as the 16th October or so. So yes, I think since last year, what ISB has done is they've started a rolling admissions process. So there is an early decision that they make to candidates who apply early. Having said that, I think you should submit your application when it is ready. So regardless of whether it was early or late and closer to the deadline, I think it's important that you have to have everything in place and do not submit a half-baked application. So if you believe that you can submit early, I think there would be a slight advantage, not a major advantage, I would say. And don't be rushed up. Don't try to send in early just because you believe that you'll get an interview call early and get done with it. I think what's more important is the components of your profile, and whether it is a good and worthy profile to be taken to the next stage or not. So make sure that you put in everything that you got in your application. If it takes more time, so be it. For a lot of candidates that we are speaking to these days, they are confused about round one or round two. And a simple answer there would be that while there are certain advantages in terms of scholarship or competition for round one, you should only submit your application once it is ready. So if it's ready in round two, then so be it, because it's got to be a compelling application, a top quality application, which should be taken to the interview stage, rather than being a very half-baked application where you submitted early but could not really have an impact, and thus it hampers your chances. So don't do that, Abdul. I would just say that take your time, and once it is ready, regardless of the time or the date, submit it only once you are very, very confident that you've given it your 100%. Okay, so let me go back to the email and the form that we had. And there are a few questions, so let me take them for one by one. Shruti asked, will a low GPA affect the profile? So Shruti, I think it totally depends on how low the GPA is. What are the other aspects of your profile? So even if you have a low GPA, do you have a high GMAT score, or do you have, say, a very extraordinary profile in terms of, say, coming from a non-traditional background, or you come with a very different extracurricular, maybe a national level sport, or anything which really helps you stand out. So if that is the case, then the GPA would not really matter. On the other hand, it also depends on the experience. So if you are a YLP candidate or an early entry option candidate with low experience, 2 years or below, and in that case, I think the GPA at the undergrad would matter quite a lot, because it's pretty recent and it reflects on you. However, if you have 8 or 10 years of experience, then it's a really dated number. And I think what would be more important would be your GMAT score in that case. So I think that's the answer to you. There is no correct answer in this case. Totally depends on the profile that you bring to the table. Next one is around admission procedure and placements by Karthik. Karthik, the admission process is very simple for ISB. So you need to, ensure that you check all the boxes for the eligibility criteria. Now that is, minimum 2 years of experience for people who are applying to through the normal process. And if you are an early entry or a YLP guy, then less than 2 years is also fine for ISB. Write your essays, take your GMAT or GRE, depending upon whatever you want to go for, and then write really solid essays and prepare a very good application, both through the form as well as through the essays, and also ensure that you have a very good recommendation there. And once that is done, you submit it to ISB, and you get the interview call if you're shortlisted, and you take the interview and you get through. So it's a very simple process. If you have more questions, we'll take it when you call you during the coming week, and we can discuss this in greater detail if you have any further questions. Soumya asked, I need to know about the scholarship criteria for ISB admissions. Good question, Soumya. I think if we talk about the merit-based and the need-based scholarships, there are no specific essays that you need to go about, and there is no separate criteria. I think it totally depends on your profile. Generally, what we have seen is that people with a non-traditional background are able to, gather higher scholarships, whether it is the 100% waivers or other partial waivers. So that's a kind of a criteria. I would not say that's the only criteria. Obviously, it depends upon the achievements and the kind of profile you bring. But that's one thing that we have experienced in the past. No separate essays for these scholarships. There are separate essays for some of the other scholarships by various sponsors, like City or other alumni or PGP Max or other scholarships that people are willing to offer, but no separate criteria for the merit-based and the need-based scholarships. For the need-based scholarships, one criteria that ISB has is the family income should be below 10 lakhs, excluding your income. So if that is the case, you will definitely be considered for that. But again, it totally depends on the admissions committee, whether they believe that you deserve a scholarship or not. Okay, let me come back to the live chat window and talk about other questions that you have posted. So, okay, Aditya Pathak, I wanted to know about the top 5 institutes to study for GMAT offline classes. Aditya, this is not really the forum for that. It's the ISB admissions Gyaan session, as you would know. What I can do is probably help you with that once we speak to you during the coming week. Arpit says, have you observed any difference in the success rate between R1 and R2? No, Arpit, there is no real difference in the success rate between R1 and R2. I think what we've seen is R1 usually has around 40% of the total applications, and the rest 60% are in R2. But the overall success rate is broadly very, very similar across both the rounds. So no real significant difference in that case. And as I mentioned before, whenever you believe that you're ready, whether it is round 1 or round 2, that is when you should go ahead and submit your application. Okay, Samanvay says, is getting the deferred admission if one does not have 2 years work ex more difficult than the regular admission? No, Samanvay, that's not really the case. Uh, See, when ISB started with the YLP and the early entry program, they knew that they are going to meet people with less than 2 years of experience, and that is why these programs were designed. In fact, a good 15 to 20% of the total class at ISB is comprising of YLP and early entry option candidates these days, and that is why the overall or the average experience of the class is coming down, I would say, as compared to previous classes. However, there is no difference in the difficulty level or the acceptance rate between regular admissions and the YLP and the early entry options. So don't worry about it. Just put your best foot forward, and the school would not really discriminate between YLP, early entry, or regular applicants. Okay, Vishu asked, I worked in a startup, created a new product, but that didn't work as we thought. Led a team of 5 people, all senior. Would this impact my application? So Vishu, again, it's about the impact. Okay, so if you had 5 people reporting into you, what was it that those 5 people did? How did you lead them? What was the product? Okay, what was the say? So if it was an app, what were the number of downloads, for instance? So you can quantify all that. If the startup failed, I'm sure it was not only because of you. It's a team effort always, and there are various dynamics in the industry because of which startups do well or do not do well. So it would not go against you. In fact, I think you can take it as a positive and talk about the learnings that you had from that failure of that startup, and mention how you are able to connect because of those learnings, and how you will be able to contribute to the class at ISB because of those learnings as well. So no real negative impact. In fact, you can spin it in a positive way if you like. Okay. Another question is, would changing the firm in September impact my application? No, not really, Vishu, because ISB would look at your overall experience up till now. They would not only be focused on the current profile or the current job that you are in. So it's about the total package. Okay, it's not only about experience as well. So forget the last firm that you're working with, but it's not only about professional experience. It's also about the person you are and the personality traits that you bring. So don't worry about it. Changing a job would not really impact you. Chaynika says, do you see a bit of disadvantage if you apply in round 2? Is the selection number similar in round 1? So I've answered that in part. Chaynika, the only thing that I can mention is about scholarships, because all the 100% tuition waivers go to applicants in round 1. So if you believe that you have a good chance and you can do a good application by the round 1 deadline, then I would advise you to go in round 1. But in terms of acceptance rate, round 1 and round 2 are pretty similar, as I mentioned before. Arpit asks, how is the leadership potential assessed for candidates with relatively lower work ex, which is 2 to 3 years? Good question, Arpit. So it depends on what you've done in the past, or you might not really be, an official team lead or a manager, but what are the initiatives that you've taken? So, for instance, if you were the one who started, say, the CSR club or the CSR activity in your organization, or you started or took new initiatives, coming up with newer ideas or new deliverables for your clients, etc. Or maybe when your manager was away, you were the leader of the team in an informal way. I think all of those would really help you showcase or demonstrate the leadership potential. The school also understands that with 2 to 3 years of experience, you might not have had official, leadership opportunities. But what they definitely understand is that if you've taken initiative, whether it was at work or during college or school, you have a leadership potential in there, and that is what the school can nurture in that 1 year. So I think that answers your questions. Okay. Let me go back. I think there are a lot of questions. I'll come back to these, so please be online. I'll go back to the questions that I've received over email and the form. And there is the next question from Abhay, who says, how much space should be given to the reapplicant part in the essay? Should I be focusing more on what I did in the last 7-8 months, or repeat the examples I used in the second round application last year? Good question. I think, especially given the fact that there are no reapplicant essays this time around, it's really important that you utilize the space very judiciously and prepared a very cohesive and coherent story, talking about both the new points that you want to talk about since the last application, and also your overall profile. So, for instance, see, if you worked for 5 years, you applied last year, so at that time you were around 4 years of experience. Now you are 5. You cannot really just focus on the last 1 year, right? You have to talk about you as a person, as a whole. What are the traits, what are the skill sets that you bring to the class, and how will you make a difference to the class at ISB? And definitely talk about how you have improved and how your candidature is better this time around as compared to the previous application. So it's got to be a story wherein you talk about the key themes of your profile, and then link them to how you have improved in the last 8 to 10 months, since your last application, and then package it all together in a nice cohesive story, as I mentioned. So don't just focus on the last 1 year, don't just focus on the experience prior to that. It's got to be a mix, and ensure that everything flows together very well, and it becomes a very easy read. So that's what I would say to that. Moving on to the next one, there is a question from Sudeep who says how to differentiate oneself from the generic work ex. So I think that's how that was the main theme of the session, and I think I've discussed that. Ashima asks, how can I get admission into ISB? Ashima, I think all of that has been answered in terms of taking you through the admissions process and eligibility criteria, to talking about how to go about your essays. If you wish to read more, you can go to the blog section of our website. There are various blogs around how to answer the first essay question, the second essay question, the mistakes that you can avoid, and so on. And hopefully that will answer your question. Anurag says, I'm a computer engineer and did my MBA from Symbiosis, etc. Okay, so Anurag, it's a very profile specific question. We'll take it once we speak to you during the coming week. Arpit says, what sort of job profiles are on offer to relatively less experienced candidates, 2 to 3 years of experience, especially in general management or management consulting? Okay. So I think, Arpit, there is no real differentiation between somebody who comes with lower years of experience or higher number of years of experience. I think what a typical recruiter would look at is the best fit for their role that they're offering. So even if you had, say, 2 to 3 years of experience, but you showcase the right attitude and the right skill sets, I think they will hire you. And just to give you an example, because you asked about management consulting as well. So in my class at ISB, the McKinseys, BCGs, etc. of the world hired YLP candidates as well, and they hired candidates who were like senior executives with 8 years or more in terms of overall experience. So there is no fixed criteria or a preconceived notion that a recruiter would come to ISB with. I think what they really want is to look at the right attitude and the right fit, as I mentioned. And if you happen to be the right fit, they do not really care whether you come with 3 years of experience or 10 years of experience. What they're looking for is if they get what they want, I think they'll just go ahead and hire you. Some companies, I would say, especially in the leadership roles or the leadership programs, have a minimum work ex criteria. So, for instance, the Aditya Birla Group, they come with a leadership program, and they have 2 parts to it. So, there is a LEAP and a LEAD program. The LEAP program is for people with less than 4 years of experience. The LEAD program is for people with more than 4 years of experience. So accordingly, you can apply to the LEAP or the LEAD program, and that's just one example. I think there are other examples wherein people or recruiters, when they come to campus, will specify the eligibility criteria. But broadly, you cannot really be you should not really be worrying that if you have only 2 to 3 years of experience, whether people will look at you positively or not. I think it's just about finding the right fit. Okay, so let me come back to the questions on the chat window and talk about the next question. So Srishti says, can you throw some light on applicants who were working in their family business with respect to ISB? Good question, Srishti. In the family business, I think, and I have a few friends who were in family business and came to my class at ISB. I think it's important that you are able to demonstrate what was your impact. So you cannot just really say, okay, it was my family business, I joined and I worked for 2 years or 4 years, whatever the case was. You have to say that, okay, it was a family business with X dollars or X rupees of turnover, when I joined, it went from X to 1.2X or whatever. And what were the initiatives that you brought? Okay, so what was the different approach that you took? Whether it was for sales or for say any cost centers that you manage very well, the operations of your factory or whatever the case was. Okay, it's important to mention or bring out the impact that you had rather than just mentioning, okay, my father or my grandfather started this business, we had a multi crore turnover, and I just went and joined, and you do not really talk about the impact. So I think there it can be a problem, but as long as you are able to talk about what you did, what your initiatives were, and what the impact of those initiatives was, till then I think it should be fine. And family business is actually more of a diverse or a non-traditional background, because most of the people who come to ISB or apply to ISB come from a corporate background. So it can actually work in your favor as long as you are able to demonstrate the right traits and the right skills and the right experience from your family business. Okay. Aditya says he's talking about his profile. What score do you think? Aditya, again, it's a profile specific question. We'll take it once we speak to you in the coming week. Samanvay says, if I want to get into MBB, which is McKinsey, BCG, and Bain, after ISB. So if I want to get into MBB after ISB, how difficult or easy is it as compared to MBB via the IIM PGP? Good question, Samanvay. What I'll say is that all the top consulting firms are actually good hires or big hires across the ISB and the IIMs. While McKinsey and BCG have been major recruiters for quite a few years. McKinsey was in fact one of the founders of the school. Bain was a recent entrant to the recruiters list last year. And I can't really talk about Bain, but I think McKinsey and BCG hire amongst the maximum from ISB as compared to any other top MBA school in India. So you have a good chance. McKinsey hires upwards of 20 people in a typical class. BCG also hires, say, between 15 or 10 to 15 is what I'd say. So overall, I think you have a good chance. Compared to the PGP at the IIMs, I think there is there's an advantage that the PGP has, and that is the internship. So you get to demonstrate how you work and whether you have the right skills in you to become a consultant with these firms. So I think there, because of the internship, you might have a slight advantage. But having said that, I think McKinsey and BCG hire the most from ISB as compared to any other IIM. So you can definitely, and they do openly talk about it in their pre-placement talks as well. So I think you have a good shot at both, whether it is through ISB or through the IIM PGP programs. Totally depends on where you go and how you're able to grab the opportunities that you get. Okay, Yogesh says, can you please tell me realistically how difficult it is for an Indian IT male engineer who's non-IIT or non-NIT to make it through? Yogesh, that's a very good question, because the biggest applicant pool to B schools in India is the Indian IT male engineer pool. And I think, yes, it is slightly difficult as compared to other applicant pools, because this is the biggest pool, and that is why it's really important to differentiate yourself in the applications. Okay, so while say a good 70% or so of the total applicant pool would comprise of engineers, and a good part of them would be IT engineers, I think as long as you can differentiate yourself through the impact you had, so it might be a typical IT project that you worked on, for instance. But if you led to additional revenues or cost savings, or did something very unique to implement that project, I think you surely can demonstrate those things and have a chance to be able to stand out from the crowd and be able to fancy your chances for ISB. So I cannot really say how difficult or easy it is. A short answer would be yes, it is comparatively difficult, because there are so many people from this applicant pool, and that is why it's very, very important to differentiate yourself in the right manner in your application essays, especially if you are an Indian IT male engineer. Okay, Aradhya Saxena says, can we take recommendation from manager, not in my hierarchy, being a software engineer, or can I take a record from a product manager than the engineering manager? So a short answer there would be that, Aradhya, you can take a recommendation from the person who is in the best position to recommend you. Okay, if you believe that it is your line manager, or if you believe that it's somebody more senior, I think anything there would suffice. What's really important is to be able to give you a good recommendation which is in line with your personality traits and your experience, and not really talk very divergently from what you have spoken about yourself in your essays versus what's being talked about you in the recommendation. So I think it's important to choose the recommender wisely, and a simple guiding principle there would be go to the guy who's in the best position to recommend you, or knows you very, very closely, to be in the best position to give you a recommendation. Okay, so let me go back to the questions, and just take them as well, and then I'll come back to the chat window. So just keep them coming. uh, Talking about the next one, so okay, I think recommendations we have covered by Aradha. What is the key factor that will help you make it through to ISB? So I think the key factor that will help you make it through to the ISB is presenting your story in a way where ISB would want, the way ISB would want to look at it. So ISB has gone on record and say that, okay, they look at leadership potential, and they also look at, say, a good mix of academics, experience, and extracurriculars, right? So if you're able to demonstrate that very effectively and talk about achievements and impact, as I mentioned initially in the session, I think then it gives you a good chance. Obviously, you need to have the building blocks in place, whether it is your acads or GMAT score, or experience, or extracurricular initiatives. But how you package them all together and present it in the right way is, I think, where it makes all the difference, because there are thousands of applicants. Everybody is an achiever in his or her own right, and that is why you really need to outshine them, especially when it comes to the essays, or the application as a whole. So that's what I would say to that question. Let me move on to the others. So how can I get into ISB? I think I've answered that, Ashima. Um, how much does ISB give weightage to extracurriculars and hobbies? So I think that's a good question. Again, it depends on the overall experience and profile that you bring. So if you are somebody with low experience, say 2 years or slightly above that, I think extracurriculars would play a major role. However, if you come with, say, 8 or 10 years or above experience, I think then extracurriculars would not really matter as much as your 10 years of experience, where I think you would have led teams, or even large teams, or might have had the opportunity to work internationally, etc. And that would really count. So it depends on the profile. No real answer to the correct weightage that is given. I think I've mentioned before, and I'll reiterate that. Um, it's the package or the overall profile that ISB or any other top B school would look at. So you cannot really be compartmentalized about the weightage, or the strengths, or anything that's given to a particular area, whether it is experience or extracurriculars, etc. I think it totally depends on the overall profile, and the schools would view them holistically. So if you are able to demonstrate the right traits, and present that overall package, then you will be able to definitely make the cut. Moving on to the next one, Pragya asks, what's the requirement for admission? I think I've covered that, Pragya, earlier in the session. Prince asks, what role does my GMAT play in the whole admission process, and how important are internships on the resume? So Prince, I think internships do not really matter, because ISB has clearly mentioned in the eligibility criteria that they'll only look at the full-time experience that you've had, whether it is above 2 years for normal applicants, or below 2 years for the early entry guys. So I think that's the key. Internships don't really matter, because that's part-time. So, people do not really give a lot of weight to that. The next question is from Haroon, and he asks, is 690 a good score for applying to ISB? I think that's a very relevant question, and a very frequently asked question. And I'll just, take a moment to elaborate on that. So if you look at any typical class at ISB, whether it's the current class or previous classes, the range of GMAT scores is, say, from a 600 to 760, 780. Okay, and in terms of profile, or in terms of percentile, it would be, say, anywhere between 65, 70 percentile to, say, a 99 percentile, right? So what that tells you is that ISB would look at your GMAT score only as one component of your profile, and they do not really work like the other Indian B schools, wherein people are really focused on your academics and your test scores, and most of the people who get shortlisted are people with 98 or 99 percentile test scores. So that's not the case with ISB. They look at your profile holistically. So definitely, there are a lot of people with a 690 who make it to ISB, but it totally depends on your profile. So there are a lot of people making it with a 650, 670, 690 as well. And there are a lot of people who get dinged or rejected with a 720, 740, 760 as well. So it totally depends on how you are able to demonstrate the overall profile, as I mentioned before. And GMAT is important, but it's just one component of your overall profile. All right, just a couple of more questions here, and then I'll focus solely on the chat window. So, just be patient, guys. What's the selection criteria? I think I've elaborated on that, Saurabh. The next one is cutoff for ISB for a commerce graduate. So, Aditya, there is no cutoff for any graduate, whether it is commerce or engineering or any graduate. It's the overall profile, as I mentioned before. There is no cutoff. So people with a 600 also get in, as I mentioned, and people with a 750 also get rejected. So it's the overall package, it's the overall profile. Make sure that you're able to demonstrate that very well. And if that's what you're able to do, there is no cutoff per se that ISB would apply to your scores or to any other aspect, whether it's experience, etc. Okay, so is there a better chance of conversion if I apply in round one for ISB? I think I've already answered that, Shubham. So I think that's it for the questions that we've received over email. Let me just solely focus on the chat window now. And excuse me. So okay, so where were we? So we talked about MBB, we talked about Indian IT mails, we talked about recommendations. Yeah, so I have 4 years plus of experience in HR. What will be a good GMAT score? Chainika, again, it's a profile specific question. I'll speak to you in the coming week and we can discuss that in greater detail. Samanvay is being inclined towards 2 fields, consulting and finance post MBA and issue during interviews. So I think generally people prefer if you go ahead with a very focused career goal and talk about that specifically in your essays as well as the interviews. When you talk about finance and consulting, then there'll be questions on both of those, and you'll probably find it difficult to answer them at the same time. So there'll be a panel in the interview comprising of either all 3 alums or a mix of alumni and admissions committee members. I think if you go with one, it would be more structured discussion, and it will give an impression that this guy knows where he wants to go and has some direction. You might definitely go to either consulting or finance post ISB, depending upon how you perform at ISB and the kind of opportunities you get. However, talking about 2 things during your essays or in your application or in the interviews will not really serve you very well, I would say. So focus on one, while you might want to go for one or the other post ISB, and that's a call that you should take once you are on the other side. So I think just focus on one area and do thorough research around it, and and ensure that you're well prepared to answer any questions around that area, than going for 2 areas and not being able to effectively answer any of those. So that's what I would say. Neeraj, he says, should we highlight the revenues we got generated for our company by preparing the POC and converting them into real projects? And in this case, should we highlight even if it is around a particular USD figure? So, Neeraj, I think it's all about the impact and quantifying that impact. So, whatever the numbers were, if you were able to contribute and bring in those kind of revenues, you should definitely talk about it. Obviously, if the numbers are very small, that's say less than say $100,000 or $50,000, then I think it's not really that impactful. But if they are above $100,000, definitely that's quite a lot of money, I would say. And ISB or any other B school would want to look at such people who are able to bring in revenues or save costs, essentially have an impact in whatever role they were performing in their previous organizations. Okay, the next question is, does having a prior master's degree from a top US university help in shortlist for MBB firms in final placements or in IIMs in summers? Is a prior master's considered a differentiating factor? So a prior master's would definitely have an edge. However, that would not really be a big advantage. So I think a lot of the big consulting firms, especially the MBB firms, look at your performance at ISB or at any other top B school. So they would look at your grades. They will look at not only current grades but past grades as well. Some consulting firms also want to know your GMAT score, etc. And they also want to know how you are as a person. So we have seen in the past that people with a low GPA were also able to make it to a McKinsey or BCG, etc., because they had a spike elsewhere. So, for instance, a lot of the GSB presidents at ISB, GSB is the student body. So, a lot of the GSB presidents at ISB have made it to McKinsey purely because one of their spikes was being the GSB president and leading a cohort of say 300 odd at Mohali or 600 odd at Hyderabad. And I think that really makes a lot of difference because it shows that amongst a lot of smart people, you were the one who was chosen for the job, and you were able to do well in that role. So I think you need to have a spike as well. But coming back to the question, masters would help, but not really a big differentiator in my view. Okay, the next question is eagerly waiting for a profile specific discussion down the week. Thanks a lot for clearing. Okay, fine. Haroon, if I skip round one and go for round two, so I get time to prepare well, what benefit am I missing in case of the fee or scholarship? Yeah, so Haroon, all the 100% tuition waivers are given to people who apply in round one to ISB. So you will miss out on that if that was the question. And 50% of the merit-based and the need-based scholarships are also given to people who apply in round one. So the school, in this way, and not only ISB, a lot of other B schools also in this way want to encourage people to apply early to the school, and they offer a lot of scholarships and other perks or incentives. So I think that would help answer your question, I believe. And I think that brings us to the end of the questions that we have on the chat window. I'll wait for a couple of moments in case any of you have any other questions. And if there are no more questions, then we'll wrap it up. So I'll wait for a couple of minutes. If there are any further questions, please feel free to write them on the live chat window, and I'll take them. All right, so I believe there are no further questions. Thank you so much for taking out the time and joining in for the session. The recording of the session will be available on YouTube, so you can refer to it again. Okay, so there's one question, so I'll take it. Haroon asks, how many scholarships are given by ISB in round one? So I think the 100% waivers range in around say 8 to 10. And I think that's where ISB gives all of those to round one applicants. For the next one, I think there is no clear number that ISB comes up with the overall scholarships. But I think whatever the number would be in that particular year, around 50% of those will go to people applying in round one, and the next or the rest 50% to people in round two. Okay, there's another question from Neeraj. Can we still fill the form or mail you in case we want to connect with you in the next week? Definitely, Neeraj, you can fill the form or email me. The email address is abhishek.chavla@strategy4gmat.com, or the general email for queries is info@strategy4gmat.com. Even the contact numbers are available on the website, so you can feel free to call us or email us. Whatever mode works for you. Chainika, is there any exception made for scholarship for round two applicants with genuine reasons? So, Chainika, I'm not sure what do you mean by genuine reasons, but I think there are really no exceptions for people, in either of the rounds. ISB has already laid out the criteria that they go by. And if you fit that criteria, they will go ahead and grant you scholarships, regardless of the round. And I think that answers your questions. So we have no further questions. Again, I will wait for another minute or so in case there are any further questions. Else we'll wrap up. All right, so I think that brings us to the end of the session. Thanks a lot. So, yeah, thanks, Chainika, for attending. Thanks a lot, everyone. I think it was a wonderful session, a lot of relevant questions. And as I mentioned, the recording will be available on YouTube. And in case you want to reach out to us, you can go on the website and the contact details are there. We'll be calling each one of you who have opted in to speak with us. That will be during the coming week in the preferred time slot that you had indicated in the form. And I look forward to speaking to all of you. So thank you so much and have a good day ahead. Bye.